Promise only to be boring for like 5 minutes. Nah, I won't even promise that. Not going to happen. Not going to be boring at all today. How many dog lovers we got in the room? Yay. So this helps you. You know, we were singing earlier, and something just hit me. How many people in the 21st century do you think actually believe the stories of the Bible? Let's think about that for a second. How many people believe that they are even real? I mean, we talk about crosses and empty tombs and floods and chariots of fire, and we talk about all these things, and they sound like they're a movie made in Hollywood that people want to believe is true. They sound like they're we talk about God going ahead of us, as if, you know, there is some belief that we have that, who's ever seen that? Who's ever seen that God goes ahead of you, right? I think it's really hard to translate the ever true God in a 21st century context. Or 20th century context, or going back 2,000 years. Because our entire belief system, our entire approach to life is very individualistic, particularly in the West. I'll say it's harder in the West because we're smart, or we think we're smart. And intelligence makes you question things that you cannot put your fingers on, or see, or calculate. And so you believe people who have information. We believe people who have information that we don't know, because somebody can tell you something that you don't know about, and they can tell you it's true, but that doesn't make it true. But if we can think about it, it has to make sense. We're going to take communion later, and what does wafers and juice mean in a 21st century context? Right, yeah, we're talking about the body and the blood of Jesus, but you got to believe Jesus actually existed and that he was really the Messiah, and that, okay, he might have been crucified, but that meant something. We have a hard job. Every believer from the foundation of the world had a hard job. Imagine being Noah, building an ark in the middle of the desert that was as big as it was. Any of you guys ever been to the Ark Encounter down in Kentucky? It's a big boat. I've not been there. It's a huge boat, and it's built to scale. Imagine building that thing over hundreds of years, telling people it was going to rain so hard that, you know, y'all better get right with God because it's going to rain, and this boat's going to float. And everybody looking at him thinking, you're nuts, old man. You and your kids, you're nuts. Until it started to rain. They saw animals coming in and getting in the boat with them. 2 of them at a time. Crazy. And then it started to rain. And the water didn't just come from the heavens, it came from under the earth. Flooded everything. If you believe that. You see? You guys believe some strange stuff. That's like believing in Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Black Panther, Wakanda forever, Wonder Woman, Black Widow. I'm a Marvel fan. Yeah, you know. I will leave Superman alone. Superman, Batman, right? Okay, it's like we believe in these mystical things or these magical things, this magical world. And to some people, Jesus is like Mickey Mouse. Jesus could be a creation of Pixar. Is he? You see, John described something at the opening. He described an image of Jesus that happened with the disciples that was so overwhelming. They couldn't describe it if they tried fully. And yet they tried, and people had to sort of believe them. But then we sang these songs, right? We sang these songs about the goodness of God. All my life you've been faithful. All my life you've been so, so good. So with every breath that I'm able, I'm going to sing of the goodness of you, God. Do you realize that part of the reason people have a hard time seeing, believing, trusting that there is a God that is beyond us is because, one of the reasons, is because Christians don't tell the story how all your life he's been faithful. And all your life he's been so, so good. His mercies never failed you. All your days have been held in your hands. And from the moment you wake up to you lay your head back down, you get up thinking about and singing about the goodness of God. He's led you through the fire. In the darkest nights, he was close like nobody else could be. You've known him as your dad. You've known him as a friend. Now you'll live with the goodness of God. You know, there are some people who need God as a king. We don't need God as a king because we don't have kings. But you know, if you've ever been in a dictatorial regime, wouldn't you want a benevolent king? There are some people who don't need, quote unquote, they don't believe they need a Lord, but they need a brother. Somebody who will be there to protect them. Someone who needs a father. There are people who need fathers. There are people who need masters. There are people in slavery wanted a benevolent master. I'm reading the story of Frederick Douglass, his autobiography. If you've never read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass that he wrote for himself, he was illiterate too, but he learned to read. He wrote his own autobiography. And I doubt that many college seniors could write this well. I mean, college seniors today. It would take you a couple hours to read. Read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. He tells you a story of what it's like to be born into slavery, to see it firsthand, and then to get through it, to get out of it. I'm reading his autobiography. It is unbelievable. Every kid ought to be told to read. I don't care what color you are. Every kid ought to be told to read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. But when he was terrified, there were masters that he was terrified of, absolutely terrified of. Can you imagine learning about a good master who would love you and not be brutal to you? Do you realize that that was what helped him find Jesus? I say all that to say this. There are so many things and so many circumstances and so many things in our 21st century world that want us to listen to it about who God is, who Jesus is. We have to be able to tell a different story. And so today I'm going to tell you one about a transfiguration. Yep, what's that? Yep. We have these Bibles back in the back that we give out. Anybody remember what the cover of the Bible says? They're very specific. We bought them for a specific reason. I remember this. What do they say, Deb? Story of God. Because the Bible is the story of God. So instead of it being this book of history or this book of science, or this book of morals, this book of psychology, it is the story of God. All those pieces get addressed in some way, but it is the story of the Creator God. So if you want to know whether God's real or not, read the book. It's not like reading Shakespeare. This is the story of God. It's either real or it's not. And in that book, he tells a story about what we call this moment of transfiguration. This is an image of it. So let me pray, because I want to tell you the story, because there's stuff we got to get out of it. I don't want you to miss it. This thing is a part of the story of Jesus that you and I need, because it's going to speak directly to a 21st century context. And it is my desire that God would allow me to make this make not just sense, but become personal for all of us. Okay, let's pray. Lord, as we come today, we're looking at the transfiguration. It's a part of the season that we're in. And in this season, we are trying our best to understand your story better, to know who you are, to learn about what it means for us when we have you with us, when we have you in us, when you're moving around us. We are grateful for that, and I pray that you will let me be a faithful sharer of your story in a way that makes sense, in a way that becomes personal, in a way that you can move beyond the walls that we put up as human beings, or the walls that those we come into contact with put up, because they have stuff that's in the way of them seeing you. Help us to be clear, help us to learn, help us to understand, help us to grow, and help us to sing of your goodness. In Jesus' name, amen. So the story of the Bible is the story of God that begins and ends with Jesus. It says in Galatians that we're built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, but Jesus is the first stone in. You don't understand the prophets unless you know Jesus. You don't understand the apostles unless you know Jesus. He's the first one in. Everything makes sense only through him. So all the stories that we read, they're either leading you to Jesus, shadowing Jesus, or showing you what Jesus, an example of what Jesus meant. All of them, every one. So we're going to look at one today that brings actually all three of those together. All three of those pieces together. And this is the story of the Transfiguration, where they're on this mountain. Jesus is on the mountain. He took three of his disciples, Peter, John, and James, took them up on a mountain, took them by themselves, not the other 9. He only took those 3. They went up on this mountain, on this high mountain, and being on a mountain with God was an important thing, and you'll see why it comes to play with the people who were even involved. And while he was there, they climb a mountain, and they get on the top of this mountain, and then there's this voice from heaven. They actually hear a voice from heaven that says, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Listen to him. Depends on where you put the emphasis, but all of these matter. Listen to him. He's my, God says, my beloved Son, and listen to him more than anybody else. You're going to see all three of those pieces today. So again, as we talk about the story of God, let's turn to Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9, we're going to read verses 2 through 12. Mark chapter 9, 2 through 12. It sets the stage for what we're doing. This Sunday is called Transfiguration Sunday in the Christian calendar, and it's a transitional Sunday that moves us into the preparation season. A preparation season where we start gearing our way toward the Passion, gearing our way toward Easter, gearing our way toward the crucifixion, gearing our way toward what Jesus is about to go through on behalf of all humanity, including you and me. But it's not just marking time. This is what you need for the journey. If you were going to go on a climb, you'd need stuff with you, right? You need water, you need food, you need stuff, right? You need gear. This story is about the gear. Some of the gear that you're going to need as we go through life. So Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 12. It's also in, if you want to take your notes, it's also in Luke 9, verses 28 to 36, and Matthew 17. Pay attention to where it is in the story of Jesus' ministry, but it's in those two places as well. So here's what we find. After 6 days, we'll come back to that. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves to be alone. Don't pass that. If he took them up on a high mountain, how long did it take them to get up there? Think it was a couple minutes? Think they just kind of walked like from here to the car? They went up a mountain. These guys are climbing up, which means it's strenuous to get wherever they're going. Or You ever walked on an incline? That's hard stuff. So when they get there, they're tired. He took them up on a high mountain, it says. I don't know how far they went, but I just know that they went up on a high mountain. He went there to be alone with them, those three, for a reason. And he was transfigured, meaning he went from one figure to another. His image, his person, went from one figure to another, right in front of them. They saw this happen right in front of them. Now, this could be just some story that gets told, or it could have actually happened. This is important. Do you believe this happened? You as a child of God, do you believe this happened? He was transfigured in front of them, and his clothes became dazzling, extremely white, as no launderer on earth could whiten them. This is, I forget what translation I'm reading this one out of, but it just says, in the NIV, how does it put it in the NIV? I'm in the wrong chapter, that's why. NIV, it says his clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. Right? Dazzling white, bright light. And Elijah appeared to them with Moses. And they were talking to Jesus. Now, this has to matter to Jews, right? Elijah and Moses. That either means that Moses and Elijah are real people. If Moses and Elijah are there, that means Moses and Elijah are real people. Because this happened to some guys, 2 guys, 3 guys. Moses and Elijah are there, and they're talking with Jesus. You know, here's the funny thing about Moses and Elijah. You know what's unique about those 2 people? Nobody ever knows what happened to them. Moses died on the mountain, and God buried him. The people didn't bury Moses. They don't know where his bones are. Elijah was taken up into a whirlwind. Nobody knows where he went either. So the last the Israelites knew, Moses and Elijah were wherever they are. All of a sudden, they're on the mountain with Jesus, and there's Moses and Elijah actually talking to Jesus. How did they know it was Moses and Elijah? Probably because he told them. All right, they're talking to Jesus. Now, this is a fantastical story, right? Sounds like something out of a Marvel movie. Either it's true or it's not. But let's see what it means. So Peter said, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. I like this. Shall we set up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah? Shall we start cutting down some stuff and make some shelters? One for you, because it's bright up here. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He didn't know what to say. They were just too scared. Especially if nobody's seen Moses and Elijah in hundreds, if not thousands of years. And all of a sudden they're standing there talking to Jesus. They were terrified. That would terrify me, won't you think? Yep. All right, so also understand who Moses and Elijah represent. Moses represents the voice of God having been heard on a mountain, having been heard on a mountain to receive the way for the people of God to follow him. He had heard from God on the mountain that God was going to deliver Israel from slavery. He was about to change everything in Israel's life, in the Jews' life. He was going to change everything in their life, and he told Moses on a mountain. Moses was the messenger. His name literally means drawn out. His message was that God was going to draw them out of the thing that imprisoned them. Elijah was the representative of the prophets. Elijah stood up. Remember, he took on the prophets of Baal. He took on 300, was it? 300 prophets? 300 prophets against one guy. And God spoke on a mountain and sucked up an offering that, they had gone through all this elaborate stuff. He mocked their God to show that he was God and that Elijah was speaking for God, and this is the way it is. Elijah represented God. Then Elijah himself got scared, and Elijah had to go run off because Jezebel, this queen, said she was going to kill him. And remember, Elijah went up on the mountain. And he was there with God, and God spoke to him. But God, it came there was an earthquake, there was a thunder, there was a whole bunch, and then God spoke to him in a still small voice. 2 guys, key to Israel's history, God speaks to them on mountains. God purposely speaks to them on mountains. And they represent everything of Israel's history. Okay, so Peter says, Lord, should we build 3 shelters? One for you, one for Moses and Elijah. Do you see this? Pay attention to this. Peter's asking a question that makes them all equals. Should we make one for Moses? Because everybody knew Moses was a big deal. Everybody knew Elijah was a big deal. The last verse in the Old Testament says, before the coming of the Messiah, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet. Before the great and coming day of the Lord. He's going to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the children to the fathers, or I'm going to come and smite the earth with a curse. Last verse of the Old Testament, Elijah's there. Okay? So those are 2 important guys. And then Jesus. Peter, in a sense, is asking, do you want me to build 3 things like they're equals? Look at what happens. Just then, a cloud appeared, overshadowing them all. Overshadowing them. Remember this, when you go back and you read the Old Testament, one of the things that you'll learn is that whenever God was present, he would descend in a cloud. He would descend over the space in a cloud. The cloud covered the mountain when Moses was on it, right? A cloud would come over the tabernacle, or the tent of meeting. It showed the presence of God. This is important. This is what these guys are watching. Right as this is happening, a cloud came down and overshadowed Moses and Elijah, and a voice came out of the cloud that said, "This is my beloved son. Listen to him." Don't listen to Moses. Don't listen to Elijah. Listen to him. And suddenly, looking around, they didn't see anybody else but Jesus. Think God made it clear who he wanted them to listen to? Then God made it clear that they were not equals. Okay. He's making it, they're VIPs. I'm not saying they're not VIPs, but they are not equals. We have to understand that understanding this history, understanding the history of who they are and what this means makes this moment so special. This is why we cannot just simply kind of go from a verse at a time and find some verse that makes me feel good and makes me think about God, love God, show some great story about God doing something beautiful. You got to know the history. Just like even in America, we have to know the history. How many of you knew that in the same year that slavery was abolished in America, in the same year that the U.S. Congress passed a law that said it was illegal to import slaves to America, 1807. That happened in 1807. It was forbidden to import any slaves into the United States in 1807 by a law passed by Congress. Most people don't know that because they think emancipation didn't happen until 1865 or 63. It was illegal to import slaves after 1807. Do you know that same year that a group of Christian pastors developed the slave Bible? It's called the Negro Bible or the Slave Bible. Did you know that? So your Bible right here, it's got 1,187 chapters in it. Slave Bible only had 232. I have one. I have a copy of it. Most people don't know it even existed. It's called the Negro Bible or the Slave Bible. It only has 232 chapters in it, and it only has the chapters in it that would validate slavery. And that's the Bible that slaves were given to read. And it was designed by Christian pastors. And we wonder why the Christian church still has issues with race. You wonder how slavery could continue another 60 years. Well, because pastors were teaching people and teaching slaves that only the scriptures that dealt with slaves obey your masters, because this is right. They were teaching, they would only teach, they didn't even teach the Exodus. They didn't even teach the Exodus. Why not? Because the Exodus is about the whole story of God removing people from slavery. How can you have a Bible without Exodus? And that was the Bible slaves were given. See why that's important? If you didn't know that, fact, that there was a slave Bible that was used for decades, and it was the basis where Christians believed slavery was okay because they used that Bible. You don't always understand fully what the fight is over America's history. Because these weren't just people. They were Christian pastors. So in our desire to understand America as a Christian nation, understand that the Christian nation was complicit. Even though Christianity was used to abolish slavery in America, absolutely. And many of our founding fathers were seeking to abolish slavery while they had slaves. Is that not crazy? You have to understand the history because the history helps us. Doesn't hurt us. I told you that because unless you understand the background of Moses and Elijah, who they really are and what they mean, this doesn't mean the same thing. Everybody listened to Moses. You know, Jews to this day still leave a seat for Elijah every Passover when they keep the Passover. They leave a seat open for Elijah to come. Did you know that? Yep. Do you know when every Jewish child is circumcised, they have a seat for Elijah? To this day, because they're still waiting for the Messiah to come. Elijah's a big deal. The Torah is a big deal. Moses is a big deal. You ask any Christian, do they believe in the Ten Commandments? That's a big deal. Would you agree? That's Moses. I say all of that to get you to this space. We got to understand what's happening here. Who would ever tell anybody not to listen to Moses? Who would ever tell anybody not to listen to the prophet who spoke for God? Well, God did. He said, they're not the ones you listen to right now. He's the one you listen to. So when people misuse scripture or they misuse prophecy, here's the problem. They're not listening for Jesus. They're listening for Moses or Elijah or what they represent. There's a problem there. Not saying it's not important, but it has to find its place built on Jesus. Okay. So as they were coming down the mountain, they got their message. God was pretty clear. This is my beloved son. The Son of God, when you read the other prophets, was going to be called the Messiah, as an FYI. Okay? They get this. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered the three of them, don't you tell anybody what you've seen here. Don't tell anybody until you have seen the Son of Man risen from the dead. And they're like, what? Wait, whoa. Risen from the dead? Well, see, here's why it's important. If you read the chapter before, what you will see is he had just fed the 4,000, and they were going through this discussion, and he began to tell them about how he was going to be crucified, how he was going to be taken in Jerusalem and beaten and crucified, and he was going to rise on the third day. But that was also the same period of time where he asked Peter, who do people say I am? He asked the disciples, who do people say I am? And they said, some think you're John the Baptist. Some think you're Elijah. Some think you're Jeremiah. Or some think you're one of the other prophets. And so Jesus asked them then, who do you say I am? And he says, you are the Messiah. That's right. I'm none of those. And he said from that point on, he began to tell them all about what was going to happen. They were struggling with it. The disciples were struggling with it. So this one, they're coming down the mountain after these guys have seen this, and Jesus says, don't say anything to anybody, not even the other 9. Don't say anything to anybody about this until after you've seen the Son of Man risen from the dead. That's a lot to keep to yourself, wouldn't you think? They kept this word to themselves, but they were questioning what he meant by risen from the dead. Of course they would. Who's ever done that? Okay? So then they ask him, okay, so Lord, so if that's the case, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Remember I told you the last verse in the Old Testament? It says, before the coming of the Messiah, I'm going to send Elijah. That's what he said. He says, Elijah does come first and restore all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? I tell you that Elijah has come already. And they did whatever they pleased to him, just as it was written about him. Who was he referring to, by the way? One of the gospel accounts says it. John the Baptist. John the Baptist was the Elijah to come. to make the way for the Lord. And so now the Messiah is here. Jesus is telling them that all the stuff that you were looking for in your history, it's here. They can't wrap their minds around it because it's too much. Neither could we. We would struggle with that, don't you think? I think I would. I think I would struggle. Who do people say I am is really, really important. You know what else Jesus told him about that during that time? He said, okay, now that you know this, I'm going to tell you, anyone who wants to be my disciple, there's a cost to it. And the cost is you're going to have to take up your cross and follow me. How many people today, how many Christians today are looking forward to the cross? None of us. Would you agree? Come on, let's be honest. None of us are looking for a cross. We don't like the pain we go through now. He says you have to take up your cross. What was the cross? What was the cross? It was an instrument of execution. Did the Jews in the first century know what a cross was? He says, you have to take up your cross and follow me. You have to speak of me before human beings, and it's going to be difficult. Because if you don't speak of me, I may not speak of you. When Jesus told them that he was going to be crucified, remember what Peter did? Lord, no, you're not, that's not going to happen. That ain't going to happen, Lord. He said, Peter, you're acting like Satan right now. That crazy. He said, Peter, you're acting like Satan right now. Get behind me. What you have on your mind are the things of human concern. You don't want me to suffer. That's what I came for. You need to have on your mind the things of God. Can I tell you guys something? I'm not looking forward to this. But we should not be concerned. We should not be worried, or not worried. We should not be surprised if society gets harder and harder and more difficult, and it looks less and less like a peaceful, joyous country. We shouldn't be surprised if people turn away from God faster and faster and faster. And you start seeing people who have no natural love for folks, and so they will harm people just because they can. We shouldn't be surprised. It'll happen in nation states, and it'll happen in local communities. If you've ever seen the ravages of what the MS-13 gang does, if you've ever seen that, they're different than Bloods and Crips. They slice people up and send them to their parents. Kids. They don't just kill you. These are teenagers who do this. You know why? Because they've grown up in places like El Salvador, where they've seen bodies murdered every day. So death means nothing to them. You see, when you see stuff like that, it starts getting crazy, right? How many of you get upset when you start watching things like these people who go into these stores and they smash all the glass and steal all the stuff out? Does that make you nuts? Or you see people just walk up to people and bust out the car windows and then take their car and run over old ladies and run over men. Doesn't that make you mad? Or you see people just jump folks and they beat them and they hurt them. Does that make you mad? Or when groups go into a concert and start snatching young girls and young men and killing them? Yeah. You see, we see this stuff, but the news media knows that they can't let us see too much of it because we'd all lose our minds. If you saw really how tough things really are, you lose your mind. We have a curated visual even in our own country. But should that surprise you? The level of corruption in our country, at every level, even the church, is staggering. Should it surprise us? Do you realize how difficult it's going to be? Realize how difficult it is now to say you are a believer in Jesus? People are literally afraid of being canceled. You know what being canceled simply means? People stop telling you they like you. Or people stop listening to you because they stop making you believe you have something valuable. They tell you you don't matter. Well, what did Jesus say? Ultimately, that's what's going to happen. Isn't that what they did to him? He says, my believers, my followers are going to go through what I went through. I don't want to go through that, do you? But he says, don't be surprised when that happens. This transfiguration moment, it's real to them. Peter, James, and John experienced this. They would never be able to tell anybody they didn't. They would never be able to tell anybody that they didn't see Moses and Elijah, whether people believed them or not. Just like folks who said they saw an angel. Those shepherds who said they saw an angel come in the heavenly host, whether people believed them or not, that's what happened. Would you agree? Whether people believed Joseph or Mary or not, did an angel come to them? Yes. Whether they believed them or not. There are things that you've experienced about God that people won't believe, and there are things, and whether they believe it or not, it's true. Would you agree? Yes. There's some things God has done in your life that has helped you understand this is his beloved son, and you need to listen to him above all other voices. Is that not true? Okay. That's what the transfiguration is all about. It's about taking these Jewish boys who were disciples of Jesus and walking them into a space where the stuff Jesus was teaching took on a whole nother level. Because after this, everything shifts. Everything shifts and starts moving toward the table. For Moses, it was moving toward that moment of deliverance through the Exodus. But you realize the Exodus was not the whole story, right? Leaving Egypt wasn't the whole story, was it? Because they still had to go through what? The Red Sea, if you believe that happened. Then they still had to spend 40 years in the wilderness, if you believe that happened, with their clothes not wearing out and being fed every day, if you believe that happened. Then they still had to cross the Jordan on dry ground and go into the promised land, if you believe that happened. Then they had to take the promised land. You see, the Exodus was the start of the story. Would you agree? The resurrection, people, was the start of the story for all those who follow Jesus. I want to read you this. Later on in the writings, the writer of Hebrews says, long ago, God spoke to our ancestors by the prophets at different times and different ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. God has appointed him heir of all things and made the universe through him. The Son is the radiance of God's glory. Get the picture? He's the radiance of God's glory. He is the exact representation of his nature. He sustains all things by his powerful word. And after making purification right for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty of on high. And he became superior to the angels, just as the name he inherited was more excellent than theirs. Elijah, whose name means the Lord is God, or God is Lord, I think it is. He was succeeded by Elisha, whose name means my God is salvation. Moses, whose name means drawn out, was succeeded by Joshua, whose name means the Lord is my salvation. Jesus, who is greater than both of them, is the Lord who is salvation. That's what his name means. So as we go into communion, I want to ask you these questions as you think. Who do people today say Jesus is? And then, who do you say he is? This is critical. What did Jesus say our reality would be like as his followers? Therefore, where does your energy and focus go? We trying to fix a broken world? Or are we trying to help the world find the one who fixes the world? The world will get to a place where it needs Jesus to return. We're not going to fix it. Everybody understand that? We're not going to fix the world. Our job is to help people find the one who does. What or who does the Father need to remind you is superior? Or Jesus is superior to? Jesus is superior to whatever. What does God need to remind you that Jesus is superior to that thing in your life? I don't know what it is, but there might be something. What understanding do you still hold that you hold equal to walking daily with Jesus or his command to live like you've been sent? What do you hold equal to that? Tons of stuff can get in the way, but none of it should. Do you see God's radiance around you, and do you hear his voice in a way that settles it for you? Settles it. You see, when they heard that voice from the mountain and the clouds say, "This is my beloved son," listen to him, that settled it for Peter, James, and John, I would hope. When Moses heard God said, "Moses, take off your shoes, because where you stand is holy ground," I believe that settled it for Moses, don't you think? When God said, Elijah, all right, you hear me? I'm not in the earthquake, not in the thunder, I'm not in the fire. I'm in a still small voice. Now, I need you to go down here, and I need you to tell this to this king. I need you to do this here, and then I need you to anoint Elisha in your stead. See, I think Elijah was pretty clear. God made himself, he settled it for him. What has Jesus had to tell you to settle it for you? This is what's important, everybody. Who are you listening to? What are you listening to? So, we're going to come to communion because since we are after the resurrection, how important is it? Remember we told him, hold on to this until after the resurrection? Since we are after the resurrection, how important is it to you to tell others what you have seen, heard, or experienced about the goodness of God? How important is that to you? Because otherwise, coming here to this table where he says, I need you to come, and as often as you do this, remember me. It means nothing. It's a symbolic thing. Like lighting firecrackers on the 4th of July. People don't even know what they're celebrating. Right? This is about celebrating the reason you know the goodness of God. Because all your life he's been faithful. He promised he would give his life for you so that you didn't have to worry. And he would take care of your sin so that you didn't have to live your life in shame. Now go and tell people what that looks like out of your life. Let me pray over the elements, and I'd love for you to come forward. Come to the table. And I have a gift for you today. The gift is, I'm going to give you a coaster. And this coaster has the story of God throughout the Christian calendar, throughout the year. We did these as a denomination, made these coasters. It tells you why we preach the way we do. We walk through the story of Jesus every year, beginning at Advent and coming back to Advent. We start with the first coming, and we work our way around to the second coming. Every year, we're in that season, and you'll see how it works together. But let's pray over the elements. Lord, we thank you for this bread and this cup. It's not just a cracker and some juice. It is a representation of what you said you would do. That you would take care of the stuff that worries us, the stuff that we fear, the things that we've done that would make us ashamed to stand before you or to be ashamed to let anybody know. The stuff that we never want anybody else to find out, but you already know, but you say you forgive us and you love us. And that you will be with us and you'll stand with us and you'll protect us and you'll help us and you'll guide us. Even when we go through difficult times, you'll be there because you understand our pain, because the bread represents the pain you suffered on our behalf. So Lord, as we take this bread and cup, I pray that you will allow it today to reflect that you're real, that you're with us, that you said you'd never leave us or forsake us. You'll never abandon us. And you're walking with us, guiding our day every day. Thank you for that. And we pray now that we can find some transfiguration in our own lives, in our approach to life. In Jesus' name, Amen.